The Eras Tour by Taylor Swift is coming to an end, which is kind of crazy to say, but if you think about it, this is a tour that has been going on for almost 2 years, and yet it still feels surreal that it is coming to an end. And as a person that has gone to the concert, it is also kind of surreal to think I have gone to this concert over a year ago, and it was an amazing experience, and the Eras Tour will definitely be going into the history books, at least where it comes to culture and how much of a cultural phenomenon this tour is, in terms not only of the size but the impact it had on the economies of the cities it had a pit stop at. And as a Swiftie of over 15 years, actually I think it's around 17, I started listening to her at the end of the debut era. And since I have already done a few videos recommending books based off Taylor Swift lyrics, I thought I might also do a video recommending books based off Taylor Swift eras. And I'm going to be honest, for some of the eras I felt it was quite difficult to choose either only one book or choose a book that I think really fits an era, just because one album sometimes they can have so many topics, so many themes on it, that it is difficult to find a book that fits all of these themes. So I tried my best. I looked at all the books I have ever read and I picked 12 books. Actually, it is 13 books that I think best suits each era, because there are a few eras that I picked 2 books because it's not only that I couldn't find one book that fits one prompt, but there is one specific book that I think fits 2 different eras. But let's stop rambling and let's get to recommending you books, because we have quite a bit to go through. So the first era was debut, or Taylor Swift is the name of the album, it's the self-titled album. And in terms of debut, when you look at the cover of this album, honestly it gives beach, it gives Blue Lagoon vibes. That blue on the bottom, it feels like the ocean, and the green, it's the forest surrounding a secluded secret beach of sorts. But the album itself, it's basically country and it is teenage angst. It talks about love stories, it talks about heartbreak, it talks about cheating. And honestly, this was one of those albums where I had quite a bit of a struggle to pick a book I think really suits this prompt, mainly because I don't really read that many teenage romance, YA romance. So I ended up picking an adult romance that I think kind of suits the vibe of the album, and it is The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. So in The Bodyguard, we follow Hannah. She's a bodyguard, as the name suggests, and she's hired to protect this very famous Hollywood actor who has a stalker, and he's coming back home to spend a few weeks with his family. And he doesn't want his family to know he has a stalker, so she's basically pretending that they are dating in front of their family. And this book takes place in a farm in Texas, so it's very much small town vibes, kind of country vibes. And I can't talk much about why I think The Bodyguard would suit the themes of the debut without giving spoilers for this book, but this is basically a closed-door romance, and it has kind of like country vibes, and there are some songs in debut that I think can fit this book. The next era is Fearless, which was actually the era that turned me into a Swiftie. And yes, I have been listening to Taylor Swift since debut, but the moment I listened to You Belong With Me, I was a Swiftie. I love the song. It is a song that just takes me back to being a child and listening to it for the first time when I was, I think, 10 years old. And Fearless was one of the easiest eras for me to pick a book, because there's just one book that I read recently that I think just perfectly fit this era, and it is Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. This is a YA rom-com that literally feels like a 2000s rom-com, and it is actually a love story, not a love story, it is a love letter to 2000s rom-coms, late 90s, early 2000s, because when, like, at the beginning of each chapter, there is a little quote of a famous rom-com, and it is just so cute. This book is just so nostalgic in a good way. It is just so cute. But basically, going back, the reason why I think this book fits Fearless, it's because Fearless, it's basically, it talks about heartbreak, it talks about love, and there is this kind of a very hopeless romantic princess vibe to it. Fearless is also full of teenage angst because Taylor Swift was still a teenager when she wrote. And Better Than the Movies is a love story between teenagers that is full of teenage angst, and you have the screaming and crying and kissing in the rain. It's 2 a.m. and I'm cursing your name. It has the same vibes of Can't You See That I'm the One That Understands You? It has the same vibes as a love story in the sense that our female main character, she's looking for that fairy tale love story. It has the You Belong With Me vibes because our two main leads, they are neighbors, and this book is just so perfect for Fearless. But in Better Than the Movies, we follow Liz and Wes. Liz, she's a fan of late 90s, early 2000s rom-com, mainly because her late mother, she was a really big fan, and she was also a writer of rom-coms. And one day her childhood crush comes back to live in the same city as her, and she needs a little bit of help to get him to notice her and ask her out. So she asks her neighbor and kind of nemesis Wes to help her out because she is friends with her crush. And this book, again, it's just so fluffy and it's just so perfectly fearless. The third era is Peak Now, and again this was one of those eras that I felt, for me it was quite difficult to find a book that I read that perfectly fits this era, because there are books that fits perfectly some songs, but then there are others that it doesn't really fit that well. So I went off more out of the vibes and the general themes of Speak Now. So in Speak Now, we talk about toxic relationships, we talk about kind of the end of this fairy tale point of view that Taylor used to have growing up, the end of girlhood, which is something she would only talk about more later on in her career in Would've, Could've, Should've, which is a song from her album Midnights. But I went more for these vibes of end of a fairy tale, end of the way you see life changes, and at the same time you are coming off of this toxic relationship, this not very healthy relationship. There is also themes of love. And the book I ended up picking for this era is Part of Your Road by Abby Jimenez. In Part of Your Road, we follow two characters. Our female main character, she has just come out of a very toxic long-term relationship, and she's also the heir to this medical empire. And one day she ends up stranded at a small town, and she ends up meeting the mayor, and the mayor is very much younger than her. He has a very different reality from her, and they fall in love. And the book is basically about them finding a way to make the relationship work, but also of our female main character to basically heal herself and overcoming a relationship with a narcissist, but also being surrounded by narcissists, and basically also growing up, because she is very smart, brain smart, she's an amazing doctor, but when it comes to life stuff, she isn't very well versed. She isn't really good at doing basic life chores, life stuff, because she always had someone else do it for her, because she grew up very wealthy and in this very specific space that only valued her efforts as a doctor, but not how to basically be a regular human and do regular human stuff and know how to survive in the world without the help of staff and other people that can do things for you. Our next era is Red, and Red is the era of heartbreak. It's an era where you're happy, free, confused, and lonely all at the same time. And this is one of those eras where I had two books. Because there is a book I think fits really well read, but I wanted to use that book for another era. So I ended up just putting two books for read. So the first book, it's one of my favorite books ever. And it is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. In this book we follow a group of friends. Mainly we follow Sam and Sadie, and they were childhood best friends who they had a falling out, but many years later they meet again and they start developing a video game together and they become really successful video game developers. And in this book it's basically their journey and achieving career success, but also their journey growing up. It is a love story, but a platonic love story, and it's just one of my favorite books ever. I love the writing of this book. I highlighted so many quotes in this book, and the reason why I think this book perfectly fits read is because they're happy, free, confused, and lonely at the same time. It talks about love, it talks about romantic love, platonic love, it talks about heartbreak, and this book's just so good. But the book I originally picked for read was Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors. This book follows Cleo and Frank. Cleo is a woman in her early 20s and she's also an artist, and Frank is a marketing executive who is very much older than her. I think he's in his 40s. This book also takes place in late 2000s New York, but basically Cleo's visa is about to run out and she and Frank are in this relationship and they decide to get married so she can have a green card. But turns out this relationship ends up being very toxic and codependent, and this book, it's not very light, it has a lot of talk of mental health. But the reason I think this book perfectly fits read, it's because we have that all too well aspect of, we have this young woman dating a much older man, and there are other things in the book that I think fits all too well vibes, but I can't tell you without giving you spoilers, major spoilers for the book. We have the aspect of these characters fighting a lot, and honestly I can tell you more about why I think read fits Cleopatra and Frankenstein without giving you major spoilers for the book. So let's move on to the next era. So after Red, you get 1989, which is one of my favorite Taylor Swift albums. It's also one of her most successful albums in terms of sales. And 1989 is basically being your mid-20s. It's about partying. It's about an on and off relationship that you don't know if it will work. It is about anxiety surrounding a relationship. And one book I think fits well with 1989 is Beautiful World, Where Are You? Even the cover, it's also blue, which is the color of 1989. But in Beautiful World, Where Are You, we follow a group of 4 friends. We have 2 girls, we have 2 boys, and they're all in very different life stages, and they have very different lives, but they're still friends. We have an on and off relationship where our main character doesn't know if they can make it work. We have a relationship that it's kind of unexpected, but also like, will they make it work? So you have that anxiety that we get in Out of the Woods, we have that anxiety that we have in I Know Places. We have a little bit of Shake It Off in this book. We have that aspect of New Romantics of We Are All Bored, but also tired of everything. We have the You Are in Love, we have This Love, we have so many little things from 1989 that we can put into this book. That for me, personally, I think Beautiful World, Where Are You really matches with 1989 in a way, even though this is not necessarily a book that takes place in New York or a very body-heavy book. I think still some of the themes really match. The next era is one of my statistically favorite eras from Taylor Swift. Apparently, it is one of the eras that I listen to the most, and it is Reputation. And Reputation is an era that might sound like revenge and very dark, but in its core, it's very much of a softie. And turns out one of my favorite books ever, I think, really matches Reputation, and it is The Count of Monte Cristo. In The Count of Monte Cristo, we follow Edmond Dantes, and he's a young sailor that is surrounded by people that are basically very jealous of her and jealous of his success. and they ended up creating this ploy to get him arrested at the day of his wedding. And then he also doesn't get a fair trial because the person that is responsible for defending him basically also has, it's just working in its self-interest, and defending Edmond Dantes wouldn't be part of his self-interest, would really be detrimental to his reputation. So Edmund ends up in jail for the rest of his life, but he manages to escape and create this very well-planned plan to get revenge on everybody that did him wrong. And on the outside, Edmund Dantes might seem like a person with, or a character with, a very hard shell. He might seem like a person that it is only motivated by getting revenge, and he does. He's not nice for the people that sabotage him. But at his core, this man, he's just so soft. It's just like Reputation, where you have Look What You Made Me Do, you have I Did Something Bad, you have This Is Why You Can't Have Nice Things. But when you really look at the album, it's mostly love songs. It's King of My Heart, it is Call It What You Want, it is Dancing With Our Hands Tied, and the book is the same. Edmond Dantes, he will get his revenge, and he might seem like a person with a very hard shell who is only motivated by getting revenge, but in his core, he's just a softie. He's just such a good person. He's just so nice to the people that are nice to him and that try to help him and that didn't try to sabotage him. In his core, he's just a person that loves love, and that's why I think The Count of Monte Cristo, which happens to be one of my favorite books ever, matches with one of my favorite Taylor Swift albums ever, which is Reputation. The next era is Lover, and Lover is basically an album that it is about anxious attachment. It is about being deeply in love, but also being very afraid that this person is going to leave you, because being very anxious that this person is going to leave you because you have an anxious attachment. And this was one of those eras that for me was quite difficult to pick on one book, because I was thinking to myself, oh, there are so many books that could fit this era, but I decided to stop overthinking it and pick on one, and it ended up being one that I read recently, and I think the fact that I read recently is one of the reasons why I ended up picking this book for a Lover, and it is Caught Up by Liston Ford. In Caught Up, we follow Kai and Miller. Kai, he's a baseball player and also a very overprotective single dad. And Miller is also the daughter of his team's coach, and she's a very famous pastry chef, but she's kind of burnt out. And she ends up deciding to spend a summer with her dad in Chicago. And because Kai, he needs a nanny and he doesn't have a nanny, and he's always firing a nanny, Miller's dad decides to offer Miller to be Kai's child nanny for a summer. And this is a romance novel, so they end up falling in love, but the reason why I think it matches with Lover, with this anxious attachment, with being anxious that the other person is going to leave you, it's because Miller, she basically has a set date where she's going to leave, so she knows she can fall in love with Kai because she's leaving him. She's not staying in the city, but at the same time she does fall in love with Kai. So we ended up with this dynamic of them being very anxious about breaking up, but also being very much in love, and that's why I think Caught Up matches with Lover. Now let's go to the next era, and it is another one of my favorite eras, statistically one of my favorite eras, which is Folklore. And Folklore is another one of those albums that for me was very difficult to pick one book, because there's just so many songs with so many different themes in Folklore. The standout narrative in this album is definitely the teenage love triangle, but again, I don't read too many teenage love stories, YA romances, to be able to recommend one that matches Folklore. But also when I think about Folklore, I think about the being in the woods, I think about forest, I think about amazing lyrics. So I ended up also picking a book that it is one of my favorite books ever, and it is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. It is a classic novel, very long, and another one that I have quite a few highlights in it, even though I rarely highlight books, but this is one of those books where I highlighted quite a bit. It has one of my favorite quotes ever, which for me it only helped convince me that this book matches Folklore. But the reason why I decided to pick up Jane Eyre for Folklore, some of the storylines that I think matches, is that this book kind of has a love triangle of sorts. You have also a coming of age story that we get in the teenage love triangle. We have an aspect where the house seems to be haunted. We have amazing lyricism. We have moments of epiphanies. We have illicit affairs. And there's just so little crumbs that we have on Folklore that I think are the same crumbs that we have in Jane Eyre. And that's why I think this book matches Folklore. But now let's move on to the next era. And for me, this was the easiest era to pick up a book. When I saw this era on my list, I knew exactly what book it was, because when it comes to Evermore, there are so many themes from which we can pick a theme from, but there is one book that is so perfect for this era. And the reason why it is so perfect is because Taylor Swift herself said in an interview that this book inspired one of the songs in this album, and it is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. If you're not aware, Rebecca inspired Tolerated. Apparently Taylor Swift read this book and she really related to the character. Apparently the relationship portrayed in this book reminded her of a relationship she had in the past, and she was so moved by this book that she decided to write Tolerated. There is just no better book for Evermore than the book that inspired a song on the album. There are a few other themes in Evermore that could also fit the plot in Rebecca, but I can't talk about it without giving you spoilers for this book. But if you love Evermore, you need to read Rebecca, because this book is just perfect for this era. The next era is Midnight, and this was the most difficult era for me to pick one book, because Midnight, it's about sleepless nights in Taylor's life, and there are just so many things that how could I pick one book? Because Midnight talks about falling in love, it talks about falling out of love, it talks about failed relationships, it talks about jealousy, it talks about fantasies of revenge, it talks about karma. There are just so many themes on Midnight that to choose only one book was quite difficult. So I ended up picking a series that I feel like I recommend every time I do a book recommendation video, which honestly it's very on brand for me because I always recommend this book for people because I just love this series that much, and it is the Neapolitan novels by Elena Ferrante, or basically the My Brilliant Friend series, which is a series of 4 books. In this book we follow Elena and Lina from when they were little kids living in the suburbs of Naples until they are in their 60s, and the reason why I think this series fits Midnight is just that this series is just so long and it talks about girlhood and growing up, and there are so many themes in this book that I think it fits Midnight. And now to the most recent era as of the moment when I'm filming this video, and it is the Tortured Poets department. And in the Tortured Poets department, it is another one of those albums where you have a lot of themes. It's mainly about imploding your life for someone. It is about falling in love. It is about falling out of love. It talks about major heartbreak, feeling depressed, anxious, and falling in love again. And there are just so many themes. It talks about Taylor's relationship with being on the spotlight and being famous. And this is an era where I had 2 books to recommend, because one book I already recommended and it's the one I think fits the best, but there is another book I read recently that I think also fits the Tortured Poets department well, and it is the Biography of X by Caroline Lacey. In Biography of X, this is a fictional memoir of X, who is this very famous artist, and she's also very mysterious to the point where not even her widow knows where X was born. And after X unexpectedly passes away, there is this biography that is released, but it is not an authorized biography. It is also full of plot holes, so X's widow decides to go on a journey to uncover her late wife's life story and figure out who the woman she really married was. And in this journey, she finds out some very some very interesting stuff, but also we find out that our narrator, our author, she basically imploded a very stable relationship for a relationship with this mysterious, not very likable artist who was ex. We have aspects of the smallest man or the smallest woman who ever lived. We have aspects of cute Yasin. This is a I can fix her, no really I can kind of vibes. And this book also explores themes such as art versus life and the limits between art and life, and I think it really fits the torture poets department in some ways, this book, and it is also a very interesting and very unique book that I read. Another book that I think really fits the torture poets department, and it was my first pick for this era, was Cleopatra and Frankenstein. This book also has aspects of The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived, of Cute Yasin, as of Chloe or Sam or Sophia and Marcus, of so many other little themes that are on the tortured poets department. I think another thing that helps make this book really fit with this era is the fact that even though the main characters are Cleo and Frank, we do have the POV of a few other characters that surround them. So there's just so many little things. There's also the alchemy, there is so high school, there is down bad. There are so many little things that are throughout the songs in the torture poets department that I think really matches with Cleopatra and Frankenstein. And I guess that's it when it comes to recommending books based off each Taylor Swift era. If you have any books that you think perfectly matches a Taylor Swift era, please let me know in the comment section. And if you liked this video, consider leaving a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you very soon with another one. Bye!